WarioWare is an interesting series. It is composed of a bunch of really short microgames which you have to be in around 5 seconds. Despite each of the games' short length, the game is quite fun. I believe they do this because it's all into short compilations. I grew up with WarioWare smooth moves for what feels like my entire life. I can still remember the day that I got it. Not well, but I do remember it. I really liked the game and would play it a bunch. It had a unique multiplayer mode which only required one remote that I may or may not have played by myself a lot. It's not sad at all. I remember really liking this weight loss game. It's easily my favorite out of the motion control heavy Wii games. There just isn't much competition though in my collection. So who knows, it could change one day. Then in mid-2023, they announced WarioWare Move It, and I said, there's just Smooth Moves too. Then an idea struck. I can compare these games and see which one is better in a competition style format. I've decided in the following 5 categories: story mode, microgames, forms and functionality, bonus single player content, and multiplayer. So let's hop straight into it because I'm bad at intros. Each game has a single player campaign without much of an overarching story, but generally the first and the last minigames connect in some way. These are generally the main attraction of the games. Each level comes with a unique, or in some cases unique, animations that are mostly fine between games. I believe WarioWare Smooth Moves does the story mode much better than Move It. Move It is a lot cleaner with the animations, but there is a lot more about Smooth Moves which is better. Ugh. This is already becoming a mouthful. Okay, to make it simpler on myself, I'll be calling Smooth Moves WarioWare Wii and Move It WarioWare Move, or just Wii/Move respectively. In Move, a lot of the plots feel like generic sitcom plots, and while the Tropical Island theme is cool, they don't do anything I consider to be too out of the box. Surfing on a shark, finding mermaids, these are quite generic in my mind. The only complete unique one I can think of is the one where they go back in time and become models. I forget how bizarre these games are until I say the concept out loud. They just make them seem normal in game, or at least not seem as bizarre. We had stories I can't remember much on a quick think, but focusing on them I can remember a few. One that sticks out in my mind is Jimmy T. Why? He danced with cats which are animated perfection. I also liked the before and after cutscenes in this game most of the time. Another stage I remember really well is Tomorrow Hill because it has a song that has lyrics unlike most of the other songs in this game. And the extra cherry on top is that it's good. I would sing the whole thing, but I don't think anyone wants to hear me go, "Sun shining through the window, I don't know the lyrics that..." The only song or part of the stage I can remember from Move is the fact that parts of the song for Jimmy sound vaguely like AI voices.
Archer.
Copy.
In the story mode, you get unskippable intros of each of the forms, and I found the Move ones were quite unfunny. The Wii ones were slightly better. Sometimes in Move they just aren't even jokes. I can come up with better jokes on the fly. Nice fly. Also, a thing I don't like in Move and Get It Together is that the final stage has a mini game that occasionally appears between the microgames. In Together it wasn't so bad since I had variety, but here it feels pretty much like the same thing every time. So yeah, the one with Baby Warriors win in the story mode aspect. I can feel society crumbling already. If you want to count Orbulon's game as part of a main story mode, which I don't, it's no contest. Now the microgames are assumedly the core of these games, so everything around the microgames is still important. Just going into the museum and picking a microgame is not fun. It's actually really impressive how many microgames there are in each of these games. I believe that the microgames in Move It are too complex. I've noticed with the Switch entries at least, that WarioWare is becoming more complicated. I'll compare some of the games in between them to give you a bit of an example. Them being Move and Wii. The scan and code one. In Wii you have to rotate the object into the right spot by tilting your Wii remote around. In Move, you have to face the barcode the right way, then reposition your scanner to scan the barcode. The repositioning the scanner is not required, but it feels somewhat required. These are both encountered early on in the game, and Move is significantly more complex and harder, as you hopefully could see. Okay, we'll find another one. The card one. In Wii, you're shown the cards, they flip over, and then one at a time go towards you, and then you have to flip over right one. In Move, you're shown the cards, they flip over, then one moves away to you, and the other two move towards you, and you have to flip over whichever one you think with the respective hand that they're allocated to. Like, this is probably not as great an example, but you can see how it's more complex, right? I hope so. The boss mini games in Wii are pretty good. A lot of them last around 15 to 25 seconds. This is an assumption, I haven't timed, which I believe is a good length. Not too long that overstays its welcome, but not too short where it feels like it could have been a regular micro game. I don't really have a favorite, but a standout one is the Dribble and Spit's final boss, where you swap forms halfway through. But since it feels like a micro game and then another micro game, it doesn't overstay its welcome too much. The boss games and moves suck. Most of them are significantly longer, or at least feel like they're longer than the Wii ones. The Orbulon one, for example, it has this board game where you place down whichever number of spaces you want to move. Simple enough, and it takes about 20-ish feel-like seconds to reach the end. Not the greatest boss level, but hey, at least it's no. Instead, we get essentially another boss game on top of that where you match the pose to your cards. This is entirely unnecessary, the fact that there's 2 players now. Let's actually compare the time of the Stage 2 boss game in Dribble and Spits in Wii, the one where you change poses halfway through, which I believe is the longest one from that game, and Stage 1 of this card matching one. As you can see, the card matching is longer, or at least I hope it is. Granted, I did fail a few times, and I was doing a 2-player game by myself, but it's not too dynamic, which makes it feel longer. Another annoying thing about the boss levels is some of them have lives. Yes, I feel like you added lives. That must mean these boss microgames are too long. It also has some similar boss levels to regular levels. This is Move, that is. I'll take a similar boss level from each. The Mona bathroom sorting one and the footballer clothing one. In fact, footballer clothing one isn't 2-player. Each of them are similar, but in the first one, outside of the first 3 seconds, you're always active. You can always think ahead. In the footballer one, you must choose the correct clothing that they need. Patiently wait for them to pick it up so then you can choose the next clothing. And you can't plan ahead. Move 1 also due to this waiting makes it feel a lot longer, which can become frustrating because you could have done this game so much quicker, it feels like. The boss games in this game make me very hesitant to try and get as far as possible in a lot of the stages due to how much I dislike them. The best one is Dribble and Spitz's, due to it being a good length compared to most of the other ones and being more dynamic. Even the last boss game in Move compared to Wii is Plagiarism and plays essentially the same, but also it's worse in my opinion. The music, in my subjectively objective opinion, is worse than Wii. Also, there are many more moves you have to do, and the only more rhythm game feeling portion where you aren't just dancing only has one, where in Wii it has at least a few. It also feels less satisfying due to the lack of color effects, and it just being the same color all around, and it's not that great of a color to sit on. Move's microgames, despite me being fairly negative and critical, they're still okay, honestly. I've grown a lot more accustomed to them the more I play, but the unnecessary complexity in the boss game sucking makes an overall downgrade on the minigames portion. I hope this isn't just nostalgia talking. The forms play an important role in these games. They have to be simple enough to do quickly, but not too simple where they essentially all feel the same. Wii does this somewhat well. Realistically, all of these could be done at the base position, but the ease of switching to one form to another is great. The most annoying one to do is discard, because unless you're small or have a coffee table, it's pretty difficult to do, but I've found that I can do it pretty reliably by just holding out your hands and placing a remote on it. I've found it work anyway, others might have some problems. Switching to where you need 2 hands on a remote, I didn't find many problems with that. A lot of them are sort of samey, and some of them are quite underutilized. Remote control and sketch charters are essentially the same thing, and a lot of the horizontal ones are as well. But it's not too bad. The alternatives, which are similar, at least make sure the microgame feels more natural with that pose. Now, Move emphasizes forms using a large part of your body and require drastic movements to get to one position to the other, especially compared to Wii. An especially annoying pose is the one where you have to drop a Joy-Con and pull out the other one with the opposite hand. Even just explaining it, it's a bit hard to understand, and it took a while for me to be able to do this well enough. And all the poses are a lot more complicated than in Wii, when they're just a copy, and they're all harder to pull off. They also, like I just mentioned, copied a few poses. Some blatantly, and like the big cheese, and some not so blatantly, like this game's waiter alternative. Most of these are fine enough and interesting to see what they do with such restrictive posing, but I believe there's too much movement and the models aren't always fully clear on how you're meant to hold the Joy-Con. Move It is a lot more dependent on your starting position due to the fact that it uses gyro sensors instead of whatever the hell the waggle stick uses, meaning that if you drop the Joy-Con and can't get them back in your hands in time, you're most likely screwed. I also had quite a few problems with the hand mode in particular. I've had a hard time finding a position where the Joy-Con actually sees my hand and says, "Oh wait, that's a hand!" It might be a me problem, it probably is, but it's still an annoyance, and I lose a lot of lives to this mode, despite it, in all honesty, being a pretty unique idea with many drawbacks and not being great in execution. Now, the Wii Remote, being the Wii Remote, doesn't work the greatest all the time. I've had my fair share of microgames that just don't seem to work for whatever reason, but otherwise, it's surprisingly reliable. The only problem you can run into is not knowing that the Wii Remote can actually sense how close or far away from the sensor bar you're at. I sure didn't know that. Made some a lot harder to do. Overall, Wii wins in forms and functionalities. The forms are better due to the simplicity of it, and I find it works more consistently. Somehow I only have Wii Motion Plus in my Wii Remotes. Sorry, Move. Be better, I don't know. Now, both these games have extra single-player modes. These are generally unlocked either during the campaign or after the campaign. WarioWare Wii has 13 of these extra games, and WarioWare Move has 6. This may seem concerning for Move, but quality over quantity. A game could have 100 levels, with most of them being not great, and one game could have 50 fun levels, and I would prefer the one with 50 good levels. Anyway, let me quit my rambling and let's start comparing. You have these towers which have existed since the first game, which are just different mini-games in the game all combined into one stage with two harder variants, which are present in both the games. Wii has an extra tower where you don't know the form before playing. This is quite fun because you need to improvise a bit, but the improvising never feels too hard. It's not a move because you have vastly different positions and you need to be in for each games with all the controls at different angles and stuff, so it just wouldn't work. You have calories or muscle building. These two games are just the same but with different microgames. I do prefer Wii's variant of it for everything surrounding the actual thing. In the game, it feels like the force I use in the microgames actually matter, and when I do it softly, it gives me less calories. In Move, it feels like I could send it at the speed of sound or just slowly move it forward and it would give me the same result. All this and what I mentioned before are all fun. Wii also has 5 extended single microgames into their own endless minigame. I haven't dabbled into these too much, but they're a pretty cool addition to the game, and there's okay. Move has one of these, and it's one of the final things you unlock. There's this water gun cleaning game, and it's just it's extended for a longer time and gives you a charge, which can be annoying. I find it easier a lot of the time to just hold down the fire button, but that becomes a problem when it's essentially required to do to not die. Also, the amount of stun time you get after you get hit is stupidly long. Then, finally, and most importantly, the Pyro game. They both kinda suck. The only one Pyro game that I've actually played and enjoyed is the one in Game & Wire, which is close to a Game & Watch game. The Wii one is a top-down shooter, and it detects how the remote is tilted to aim Pyro, which is really cool. It could be considered a hassle, but I don't think it is. Pyro and Move, however, is just annoying to play. So you have 2 islands, one with seeds to make you larger, and one with enemies and a flower patch to defend. And these 2 panels you can use to switch islands. The game is painfully tedious. Whenever you die, you get sent back to the other island and have to collect all the seeds again. But the thing is, they're not even required. The game starts off so ridiculously slow. It took forever for the enemy to spawn, and when they did, it was no problem defeating them, because it takes ages for there to be lots of enemies, and ages for them to actually get to the flower pack. And when there is a lot more enemies, it's still difficult to die unless you're actively trying to. It just moves so slowly and the playing field is so small because it had to be separated because of the two hands gimmick. First island having near to no reason to return to it besides dying makes it even worse. It's just an empty field with nothing to do. I had an agonizing time with Pyro Move, and due to that and we having a significantly more single player modes, we get Seize Point. I could stop this competition now. Well, I could have stopped it a category ago, but hey! Let's get this last part done. Partially because I don't want to cut this short, also because maybe some people pick up a game because it has a good multiplayer mode. In WarioWare mode, you can play the entire story mode with 2 players. Now I have some problem with this, but that gives Move an extra point. Each game also has a bunch of exclusive multiplayer modes, and Move actually has more of them. Move has 9 and Wii has 7, but as I said earlier, quantity over no wait, that's wrong. Quality over quantity. We'll first focus on the main multiplayer attractions in each game. Now Wii has the very cool gimmick with all its multiplayer modes that only one Wii remote is required for all of it. This is amazing, especially if you lack controllers, and it means you can get more players than the Wii allows for traditionally. Move doesn't have that, but for that game's multiplayer mode you only need 1 Joy-Con instead of 2 per player, which makes me question the reason for 2 Joy-Cons to be held at all for a lot of these minigames, but oh well. I believe Wii's main 4 modes are fantastic. Firstly, you have Survival, which is a pretty simple game, just don't die. You die whenever you fail a microgame, if that wasn't obvious. Secondly, you have Bomb. You're given a bomb and have to beat a microgame to pass to someone else. Then you get to pick the form they have to perform and who it gets passed to. It's not an elimination, and once one person loses, they just lose and everybody else wins. It's still fun game though. Next you have Lifeline, where you accumulate points for a podium. Afterwards each person has a certain amount of rope connected to them based on their positions, and each person has to pick a rope to cut. This is very fun and I like stupid, nearly purely luck things. The slight added strategy is cool too, since it isn't pure luck, which people generally like better. The final game is Balloon. You have a balloon, and when it pops, whoever is playing the minigame loses. Before you start playing the minigames, you can blow up the balloon yourself, and when you beat a minigame, you pass the remote to the next person. It can get very stressful, but unlike stress in real life, it doesn't make you want to die. Move has 5 main multiplayer modes instead of 4, which is seemingly an improvement, but for the 3rd time, I'm not repeating it, you knew what I was going to say. First, you have Listen to the Doctor. You're given a minigame, but you must beat it doing whatever this puppet guy tells you. Afterwards, everyone votes on how well you follow these orders. This game has a few massive flaws. Firstly, you have no idea how many rounds there are, which is annoying, because it's nice to know how many rounds there are so it doesn't come out of the blue, and sometimes it can feel like it's going on for ages. Secondly, you need to shake your hand to show how well they did, but it's not consistent. You could be shaking the entire time and give them 5 points. Overall though, it's pretty fun. You have Medusa March, which is a great concept but in my opinion has an okay execution. You have a long path which you must travel on, and every so many seconds an enemy pops up which you must beat a microgame to get past, otherwise you'll be stunned. You also have Medusa, which can turn around and stud you if you move while in the gaze. You can only get stunned by Medusa so many times before you get eliminated. I've got 2 main complaints. One, you can just sprint the entire time and there's no risk, because I did that and I did not get stunned at all or have problems when having to stop. Secondly, I feel like it's too long unless you're sprinting the entire time. It doesn't feel like too much of a rush to the end until like the final 20 or so meters, but it's still quite fun. Galactic Conquest is a mini board game, and honestly, I didn't find it much fun when I played it. I had a bad board at the beginning, and it feels like it does nearly anything in your power to make sure you don't get to the end. And even then, it might as well just be a race to the end, because it's going to be really difficult if it was appropriately sequenced for the person to get to the end first to not also have around or the highest points. Go the Distance is a weird survival mode where you have 4 lives, but sometimes one person plays a microgame, or multiple people do. This would have been better if it's like an upcoming game, so then it didn't last so long, and it also felt more competitive. Finally, there's this one that needs 4 players. I had to be 2 of them. Anyway, one person gets a buzz in their Joy-Con, which means they are playing the game, and the other person has to try and fool the other team into thinking they're actually playing the game. It's okay in all honesty, it's a bit too obvious who is controlling it in my opinion. It's hard to tell when most of the time I was the one in control and also had to be playing the entire time, but I could tell when I've made a pretty obvious blunder. So based on these main multiplayer games, I believe Wii has the better quality, However, we still have 7 more multiplayer games to cover. In Wii, you have darts, which, have a guess. It works surprisingly well for what it is, but it isn't great. You have bungee bodies, which is pretty fun endless runner, even though sometimes the jump just doesn't work. You have Star Nose, where you have to try and survive longer than the other player or get 3 food first. It's okay. Bungee Buddies and Star Nodes are done with a nunchuck and 2 players only. I don't know, that just feels important to mention. Now Move has 4 extra modes. It has Double Act, which... Okay, I'm gonna have to explain how multiplayer works in the main story, ain't I, after all? I don't want to though! Anyway, essentially you take turns playing the microgames, and sometimes a partner game comes up, which you have to do together. Double Act is solely these partner games, and it's fun like all mixed up in the other one. You have Showdown, which is what I was referring to with Go the Distance. Essentially, who can fail most microgames first wins, and it has a second mode where you just try to beat it first. You have Switching Gears, where one person does the microgames and the other has to really violently shake the Joy-Con to get a barrier blocking the screen out of the way. It's pretty fun but very tiring on the arms. I believe there needs to be less force required to open the window. And finally, you have Copycat Mirror. One person faces away from the TV and one faces towards the person facing away from the TV. The person who is facing away from the TV has to copy the person facing it and has to try and beat the microgames that way. It's fun and unique, and it's a great concept and has good execution. It's also going to be used as a weird flip mode if you're all by yourself. Don't wanna be all these minigames. That's such a stupid transition. All these minigames can be done with 2 people though, but I believe that's a worthy trade-off because these are, at the least, quite fun. So overall, on the multiplayer front, I believe that quantity did help a bit, but the 2-player games carried so much. So yeah, Move actually gets a point. I forgot I already had a point. The overall winner is Wii. You already knew it was Wii. Why'd you even ask? It was Wii. The single player offerings are far superior in Wii, and the minigames are better, and the forms in the game working, and it working as intended, is better in Wii. However, if you want a better multiplayer experience, I'd recommend Move. Overall, I would recommend Wii, however, or if you forgot its name because I've been referring to Wii for the past however long, Smooth Moves. Just due to it being the better all-rounder, instead of Move being great in the multiplayer department, but weaker in the single-player department.